I believe that's where we are.
Screen share reception.
It's like a recursive function.
So we're up. Sweet. Let me know if you can hear me on your computers at all, if you're following it. All right, I will. So I'm Matthew Hansen. I'm a senior here. This presentation is really focused off of my experiences with, get this image up eventually. There we go. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this screen while using PuTTY. Too many times, right?
I've been seeing the weird Chinese.
Yeah. I borrowed this because I was in the Windows lab and I could not get it to disconnect from PuTTY even when I shut off my Wi-Fi card. So I don't even understand. But yeah. But yeah. So anyways, so my experience with this really led me to being like, why do I have to program? And every time I want to start programming, like I go to Google, I look up some source code. I'm like, okay, this is cool. Like this will help me out. I go back. I'm like, I can't do anything. It's locked out. So you have to close out of PuTTY. You have to restart PuTTY. You have to relog back into the Linux lab, get back to the directory you were working in. And it's time consuming. And as programmers, we have the thought, we need to get it out. We can't just be like, I'm going to wait for the technology to catch up with me. It also doesn't help that my computer is really, it's not old. What it is it's got a 1.3 gigahertz processor. So it's slower than my phone. It's got half the cores of my phone. And so I'm like, I need something that works fast, you know? So I'm going to talk about how you can set up your Windows system to work like Linux, to work from the command prompt or from several other terminal solutions that have they have various tools that are associated with them. And if you guys want to look at any of my source code or a few of my batch files, which I'll explain a little bit later, that's my GitHub link. It's github.com/diablozul14@winx/winx. It's also up on the board for all of us local. So the question is, why would you even bother doing this? You know, there's tons of other solutions you can do to actually develop on Windows. You can remote in using MOBA Xterm. You can use PuTTY. You could install an IDE. But the point of my presentation is against all of these so-called truths. The first one being the Linux lab will always be there. In a few short minutes, like 20 I guess, Brother Helfrich will come in here and he'll explain how the Linux lab, if we have one, will work in the new building. So it will be important at one point for all of us to be able to independently be able to develop code on by ourselves. The remote connection is my biggest issue with using PuTTY. That's why it times out. Windows is the least used platform with the least amount of jobs. That's just obviously not true. And part of that too is when you compile on your own computer using the same G++, you can use GDB. It compiles to a.exe by default, which means if you want to send stuff to your friends and show them off, I'm assuming most of your friends, I mean, we're all here, so I'm sure we have friends who use Linux as their main OS. But if you want to send it to your friends who use Windows, you can actually have programs run on their machine because it's an exe already. I know a lot of people have issues with using IDEs, especially using Git on IDEs. It's kind of harder. If you get a job where you have to use Microsoft servers, the IIS server, you know, if it's remote, you're not going to have a GUI. You're going to have to use the command prompt anyways. So it could be good to help, heads up getting in there. Like I said, my IDEs on my computer, especially Android Studio, are the slowest thing. I can't get anything done. So I thought, hey, a terminal would be cool. And there's any other reason you can think of, you know, that might be why using a terminal would be good for you on Windows. So the things you need, this is a fairly introductory video for pretty much everyone. Obviously, you need the compiler and the programming tools. I'll show you guys where you can get those for Windows. Because I had the biggest issue just trying to find the C++ compiler. It's really hard to find one. They're always like, why don't you just use Visual Studio? I'm like, that's not what I'm trying to do. Why don't you just download this IDE? You know, So I know a few great places to get it, the actual GNU versions of the G++ compiler for Windows. I have several different terminals and command prompts I'm going to show off. Really, you just need a text editor of your choice, but I'll get into that a little bit. Bat scripting knowledge is the shell scripting knowledge of Windows. So if you can do shell scripting, it's basically the same idea in Batch, but the commands are a little different. But we can change them and make them work more like Linux. And you have to come into the mindset that Windows will never be a Linux, completely true Linux variant. And that's just because if you're looking into this saying, I want Linux on Windows, it's just not going to work. You can get Linux running on Windows, but it's never going to be the same as if you were running it natively. And the command line will never be the same unless you do a lot of coding. So where are you going to get the tools? I highly recommend these websites, sigwin.com. Actually, let me just show you sigwin.com. Their whole purpose is actually, as we'll show in a little bit, is making the Linux terminal available on Windows. And it's not showing.
It's showing, it's just on a different screen. You got it.
Oops, I'll go back to PowerPoint.
You're showing it to them.
Let me just edit out of that. Probably should have worked on this earlier. There we go. Sigwin. GNU and open source tools you need. And this comes with, I mean, there's gigabytes and gigabytes full of tools. I actually got rid of it at one point because I had over 8 gigs of stuff I really didn't need. Like, I don't need a Fortran compiler. So, but you can get that if you want it. Let's see what else. There's also, oh, it's not being shown.
The projector, but not on your phone, so you might need a mirror.
Yeah. There. Just a second while I get it to mirror. Oh, there it is. Sweet. All right. This next website, it took me a little while to find. It uses the Sigwin installation package, so all the GNU stuff, but you don't get the terminal with it. And you have to follow the instructions pretty carefully. Otherwise, you will not get the stuff you want. Like, you really want to have, obviously, it depends if you want the C compiler or not, but I got the C compiler, the C++ compiler, GDB, make, and OpenSSH and OpenSSL are really nice because when you have those, you can SSH into the Linux lab instead of having to use PuTTY. I just like using the Sigwin terminal a lot better, which I'll show you guys in a bit. It just looks nicer. That's basically it, but it kind of looks not the greatest. Python is a place you can get the Python compiler. And there are actually links for that in the Sigwin installation package. So next up. This is one of the things that tripped me up when I was starting off is where is the path variable? So when you download the compilers from sources that aren't the Sigwin source, where it's automatically, the Sigwin terminal has its own path variables. So all the tools are saved in there really nicely. If you're using like just the Windows command prompt or Windows PowerShell, you're going to want to change your path variables. So I thought it'd be a good idea if I showed you guys how to do this. If it'll let me. You just type in advanced system settings. and your search box. You want to click on environment variables here at the bottom, and then go down to path. And so this is your actual path variable. And see, I've got quite a lot of stuff in here, actually, and some of it's duplicated, fortunately. But if you download, say, the Java JDK, so if you want to use the Java compiler, once it's installed, you have to find where it is. And once it is, you put in its actual directory, which is C program files Java JDK/bin. And then that way, once you've done this, clicked OK, gone all the way out. And if you had a command prompt open, you have to close it and then reopen it, so it'll take effect. Once you've done that, you'll be able to call the Java compiler and the Java runtime by itself from anywhere. So that's a good location. There we go. Terminal command prompts. So I'm going to talk about these 4 different versions of terminals you can get for Windows. My favorite is actually a hybrid of command prompt and Emacs eShell. I like to call it terminalception, because you're opening a terminal within the terminal. So let's see, command prompt demo. So, and I can actually open this up within PowerPoint. I don't know if it'll show it online. It is? Sweet. So to open up the Windows command prompt, there are actually hotkeys you can use. In Ubuntu, I know it's Control-Alt-T to open the terminal. In Windows, you do Windows key X, and it gives you a little drop-down menu. I like to use C for just the standard command prompt. But if you want to go, what would be in Linux sudo, if you want to go into the super user mode, you have to do A, so Windows XA will get you into admin mode. But you really don't need to use that for most things, and it does start you off in a little weird place. It starts you off in the system files instead of where your documents are. So let me show you guys some stuff that I can do with it. It's really not showing you guys anything. Now is it showing online or no? Okay, well, I'll just do this anyways. So for this presentation, I decided to make a folder, ACM folder, and then inside of that is the Linux folder, right?
No, you just moved it.
They can't see it?
No.
Presentation mode, Windows. But anyways, so let me pull this over so they can see there's stuff in there. In the command prompt, I decided this is the one I like to use the most because it's the fastest. If you use Cygwin or if you use Windows PowerShell, which comes by default since Windows 7, so if you have Windows 7 and up, you have it. And if you don't, there's something weird going on, but you can find it somewhere. It should be free. This is the absolute fastest. It's kind of like when you use Cygwin, you're using a terminal emulator. When you're using this, it's the closest to native. And a lot of those call this anyways in the background. So if you run Emacs or anything, my Emacs for some reason pops up Windows command prompt, and all of its commands run through that, but you actually have, even though you have the Emacs GUI up. So I like to use this. And this actually contains all of my files I use personally to make using Windows command line a lot easier. Because normally, if you wanted to go through a directory in Linux, you'd do ls, right? Well, in Windows, no, it's dir for directory. That's just kind of bad. So I wrote a file there called l.bat, because normally to clear a directory, you just do Control-L. I don't have it hooked up to be able to take Control as a command, so I have to do L-enter. And that would normally clear my screen. But instead of doing that, what I can just do is I hit L, and it clears my screen, and it reprints everything in my directory, because that's what I normally use. I don't like to be like, okay, I'm going to clear my directory. Now I need to see what files are still in it. So I hooked those two commands into one. And to do that, open it up in Emacs in my command prompt. You just put in the equivalent Windows commands. So instead of Control-L, it's CLS for clear screen. And then, because I want it to print everything, you just do directory. but I don't have to remember that. I learn it once, put it into a batch file, which is one of the batch files and command files, CMDs and BATs, are what Windows runs automatically as commands. So it just goes through the file, does everything it sees, and it's good. That's the inside of the batch file for everyone online, clear screen and directory. I don't know if you guys saw how I got into Emacs. Setting up aliases in Windows command prompt is a little harder to do. I will admit that. So what I did was I set up Emacs to EM, and I set it with the command flag, NW, which opens it in terminal mode, whether it's in Windows or in Linux. So I do that, and then I can do whatever the name of the file is. And in this case, I'm going to go up to Fibonacci. This is an example of a little bit more complicated batch file. Still not the coolest one, I'll show you. So you can do full shell programming, full actual programming in Windows. And this doesn't need a compiler or anything because it's batch, so it's built into Windows. Kind of like shell's built into, and C++, but those are both built into Linux. Windows only comes with batch by default. It's got some other stuff that's hidden, but so I thought that's kind of cool. It's a Fibonacci batch file. Get out of the command prompt for a little bit. On to the next slide is PowerShell. Truthfully, I don't like using PowerShell. Everyone recommends, why don't you just, if you're trying to stick to command prompt, you will be kind of in the minority of Windows users who like to use the command line. Most Windows PowerShell, it's got really obscure syntax though. It's got a lot of cool stuff built into it, but when I use it and I'm trying to do stuff like I would do in Linux, I always feel like it's way harder to do it in PowerShell. And also it takes forever to start up. And I guess I won't show it because I just did a picture. But yeah, it works exactly the same, but it's got a little bit extra. Cygwin demo. All right, Cygwin is, I think, most people's favorites. There we go. All right, Cygwin. This should look a little bit more familiar to everyone. It's got the $sign. The only issue I have with Cygwin, and I actually fixed this a while ago, but this is a new install, is that it doesn't actually start you where your files are. You have to go to Cig drive and into your actual C drive in order to use any of your files. It's kind of a pain, but you can change that really easily. You can actually do aliases in this because this runs just like Linux, except for it's virtual. So it's got all the standard Linux commands, though it does get a little bit confused when you try to use commands that are equivalent, that have the same name in Windows and in Linux. So for example, if you want to use the time command to run tests and stuff, it sometimes works in this, and sometimes it's like entering the system time. Like the system time you entered is not valid. It's like I'm not entering in a system time. I'm trying to run a program, you know. So that gets a little bit in the way. Let's see. Oh, it's not. Here we go. eShell, Emacs. So everyone has Emacs, I take it. We're all used to using Emacs in the Linux lab. You can get it for Windows. And I use it as my default command line editor. CI, if you're so inclined, you can use Nano is available. There's actually a few different command line text editors you can use, but none are that straightforward. With Emacs, you just put the emacs.exe file in your command line path, and then alias, kind of, not really an alias, but the batch file em that opens it in command line form. So let me show you that. Max. So if you want to enter into the command mode, do meta x and then type eshell. And then this is pretty much just Linux, but through your text editor. It's a little slower at the beginning because it uses what you're trying to do. And then so if you do the same command again, it's already memorized, so it'll come out even faster. It's got a pretty powerful text editor. You can't open up a shell inside of an eShell. It admits it's not strong enough to do that, but you can open up an eShell inside of the terminal. I do this a lot when I'm trying to edit files, because you can open up two windows. You can look at your source code on the other window, and you can compile it and run it on the one side, see what's going on. So instead of having to close out of the text editor and see what your errors are and then open up the text editor and only see code, you can run both. So I find this is super efficient. Oh, yeah. So text editor of choice, like I said, Vim, Nano, they all work. I wouldn't recommend it because you could spend hours trying to get it to work. Batch scripting, it's good really for two things. It's kind of what shell scripting is good for. You can run stuff automatically for yourself. So if you know you're going to compile a file over and over again and you just want to run it and see how its results, you can write a program to do that. And it's its own programming language. Oh. Oops. There we go. This is Fibonacci, cool bat file demo. So I ran two demos actually. The biggest issue I had was one of them actually crashed my computer. It was supposed to be a virus, like a fake virus, and it actually shut my computer down. Like it was like a fake warning screen, and then my computer was actually just like, oh, it's shutting down. Why? So don't trust everything you see online. Actually, let me just show you one of the later ones. So one guy wrote this thing, and what it is you can put as many email links as you want, and if you want to go straight to them, you just enter in the number of the one you want. So let's say we want to go to YouTube. Enter. And then on my other screen, of course, it opens up youtube.com. You know, it's not that big a deal because most people will just have their browser open anyways. But I thought it was kind of cool. And there's a whole bunch of stuff like you can do inside of with Batch. I saw there was a whole tic-tac-toe game you can build. And there was, like I said, the virus program I used. Don't use it. You will not like the result. So, and for the sake of time, you can use an IDE. You can dual boot. You can use actual Linux from a flash drive if you're so inclined, or you can use a virtual box. It's not quite the same, obviously. You have less control unless you're in Linux. If you're dual booting, you're using flash drive Linux. Or you could just actually download any Linux distro you want onto a virtual box, and it'll be awesome. So that's pretty much my presentation. Do any of you have any questions regarding Windows command prompt, how to use it? It's kind of lower level, I guess. And for a lot of us, it's kind of like, oh, I know how to use the command line. But any questions, concerns? Well, if you don't have any, I guess feel free to contact me if you're trying to set it up. I'll probably fix it because I've gone through all the horrible stuff myself, and that's my presentation. Thank you.
You won't put a virus on our computer though if we contact you.
Oh yeah, don't download the batch file. You can. Oh yeah,
Is it good?
it's really good actually.